The Akatsuki, one of the most complicated and iconic groups in all of anime, and certainly the most prominent antagonistic set of figures for the Naruto cast. However, when understanding the intricacies of their group, you're destined to compare them in your own head and kind of rank them. Now, I myself have never done this video when virtually everyone has, but I have done a collab with my boy Sage on his channel, which you guys are free to check out, as it is still a pretty solid video. But here, I want to create the ultimate ranking of Akatsuki, and taking a few notes from that video, such as how I will be placing them in tiers, where virtually anyone in tier 2 is above anyone in tier 3, but the ones in tier 3 are very debatable, sort of putting them in categories, so note they are close. Now with that, just before we hop in, this is going to be arguably one of my best videos yet, so there is going to have to be some regurgitation of older videos, as I do have videos like Sasori vs Deidara, Kisame vs Orochimaru, Itachi vs Pain, as well as Itachi and Kisame, both individually running the Akatsuki gauntlets, with both videos being like 40 minutes long. So there is a lot to this, and they will all be in a playlist, so you guys can binge that playlist to understand the actual intricacies of the Akatsuki and how I would rank them, and this video will be me filling in the gaps for that list. So kicking the list off strong, as many of you guys would likely guess, we have Hidan. Now, Hidan isn't a slouch by any means of the word, being able to actually push a Kakashi on the back foot for a very brief period of time, and best Asuma, whom's actually implied to be very close to Kakashi with his true strength, and is unmatched in close quarters combat. And while there is an argument for this actually putting him above base Might Guy in his point blank taijutsu, I wouldn't ever really subscribe to this due to its implications not being that good for Hidan. And what I mean is, if this actually puts him above base Might Guy at the beginning of part 2, that's not really a big deal, as many of the Akatsuki members actually have scaling in relation to Kakashi, who just keeps up with Guy, training every day. So it's not that, it's just that Hidan, I guess, doesn't get upskilled anywhere from Guy. However, this Jonin tier is pretty consistent, with his best showings being against a whole different monster, being Yugito of the Two Tails. And while many people just remember how Hidan stated he was the slowest and had the worst aim of the entire Akatsuki, instantly placing him below everyone else, I do want to call into question the validity of that statement, considering the whole context of that scene was Yugito trying to escape, and Kakuzu and Hidan were simply trying to lure her back in. And this is made more evident by that statement, as well as Kakuzu noting how Hidan better be careful or else he'll die, which, I mean, not happening. But then Yugito turns around and realizes that she actually has them cornered and slams Kakuzu, and Hidan invades her fireball, showing some skill, with him joking about being like a trapped mouse, alluding to them lying potentially. So if you do really like Hidan, you think he could be in tier 3 with his partner Kakuzu due to them being able to combo together and run at the same speed against Shiraku, you could place him a little higher, but I think by all means placing Hidan in the last place is probably the most consistent. Now, trust me, I hear you. The Conan stands are always trying to get me to place her higher. However, here I have the same problem. Conan is virtually featless without her prep time that granted her 600 billion paper bombs, with her actually studying Obito for years. And outside of that, all you have is Conan fighting Jiraiya and her only showing, and we both know how this goes. And while a good talking point could be how she wasn't really mentally ready to face her former master, causing her to get caught in his toad oil, which was a total counter to her, which while she was displaying these ellipses, potentially displaying her delayed reaction and how she could have been nerfed, and she still could actually move under the oil, yet was blitzed by Jiraiya's hair under this nerf, and that's all she really has. Her best talking point is one I haven't really heard much, and is that she actually can react to Jiraiya's fire style. If you pay attention to the distance between her and this guard and Jiraiya's position in relation, she is able to weave back some distance as he uses fire style. However, that's about it. Even when accounting for her prep time against Obito, many people will conclude that she is still of a caliber capable of reacting to and maintaining her ground against Obito, when that's simply not the case, which is made very evident by not only Obito outspeeding her in her suicide attack, but also him just noting things like he completely underestimated her and was just forced to combat 600 billion paper bombs that will explode for a full 10 minutes, which is double of that amount of time that he can stay within Kamui, as we know that she claimed to have studied him for years, which may be true. We know that Pain actually just did this for her, as if you go to the day that Jiraiya arrives, Obito is there and it's a Sunday, a day that doesn't usually rain in Ame, and Pain forces it to rain more than usual with his Rainmaker Jutsu, with the civilians even questioning why he would be doing such. But then Obito appears, and so accounting for the data book noting about how the Rainmaker Jutsu works, you kind of come to conclusions that Pain had a perfect counter and knew everything about Kamui, and Konan just studied him on top of that, and then still lost with him not even going all out. And those moments where that you could see that she probably had that upper hand were probably him just underestimating her. So by all means, Konan is in another tier than Hidan just by the nature of his scaling. She just doesn't really have much to go off of, with a questionable point being of could she beat up Sasori in the creation of the Akatsuki video game, which just isn't really canon due to the cutscenes kind of contradicting a lot of other things in the manga and in the timeline. However, if by some metric you don't care and you believe these to be canon, then just place Konan higher in this tier above Sasori, but here I'm keeping Konan at 9th place in tier 3. Now, yes, Sasori at 8th place is definitely going to stir something up, but I think I should preface this by saying he's still a pretty impressive fighter, being clear of the other members like Konan, Hidan, and White Zetsu, but my problem with Sasori boils down to how his fight with Sakura and Chiyo went. And for a preface, Sakura and Chiyo are both very formidable, with Sakura being trained by Tsunade over the time skip and mainly the category of speed and agility, since a medic ninja can't get hit, and Chiyo has a lot of other lore implications with her reacting to the Rasen Shuriken from a KCM1 Naruto clone, and potentially even fighting Hanzo back in the day, which is relevant as her 10-year anniversary guide statement claims that she actually possesses undiminished strength, meaning that it's still as strong as it was whenever she fought Hanzo. So why is it that she battled Hanzo yet was portraying herself as inferior to Tsunade? And this is simply because, contextually speaking, Chiyo was likely just a medic of the platoon whom fought Hanzo in battle, and she was just able to counter his poison and heal those who got poisoned. And this is consistent when discussing the context of how she actually talks about Hanzo and their bouts, and the main statement here is this one where she's attempting to warn her squad about the essence of Ibusei's poison, in which in the Viz translation she states, quote, Hanzo controls a venomous salamander. I fought him many times in my day, and with this statement you may just believe that she fought Hanzo in taijutsu, which we've already established to be shaky, but the Manga Panda alternate translation just says that she used to fight the poison in her day, with another custom translation just mentioning how they fought seriously back in the day. For the initial and the latter, you'll notice how she actually could be saying he controls the venomous poisonous salamander, who she fought many times, as in she fought the poison and Ibusei many times, not Hanzo. And with the Manga Panda translation just outright saying that that she fought the poison, not Hanzo. So if it isn't clear, Chiyo probably didn't beat up Hanzo in taijutsu. I mean, she literally was sweating when he summoned Ibusei, even though they were teammates. Now, with that, we can't conclude that Sasori's feats on Chiyo and Sakura do not upscale him in any real way, but rather the opposite when taking into account things like how Sakura could blitz the 3rd Kazekage in charge and it shatter its puppet in one punch, this puppet being Sasori's golden puppet due to it possessing the Iron Sand, a version of sand copied off the previous one-tailed Jinchuriki, with it being called stronger and the most feared weapon in all of Suna, which just puts it above things like Shukaku potentially being generous. And this is probably true considering how powerful it is, with Sasori also just covering it with his infamous poison, and it's exactly that, right? The 3rd Kazekage is not a monster of physical ability, or at least not near as much as people like to portray him to be, when you do account for the 3rd databook mentioning things like he's reputed as the strongest shinobi and is the strongest Kazekage ever, placing him above Rasa and the War Arc Gaara, who could intercept the version to Raikage in the 5 Kage Summit. And the problem with this chain is how it actually implies Rasa and Gaara are equals, which just can't be the case, as in their main clash, Gaara just equals the sand until the Alliance can get over the hill, and then just overpowers it blatantly, and this is with Rasa's sand having a notable advantage in mass due to the gold being imbued in it, which means that their forces were equal. In order for them to be such, Gaara's would have to have an overwhelming advantage in acceleration, which would just immediately cut the chain for Rasa's scaling to the Raikage in speed, which just means that the sand and the Kaze and their 3rd Kazekage are pretty impressive, but nothing much, and this is made evident against Sakura and Chiyo when the mother and father puppet completely blitzed around its arm and equaled it out, with Sasori then noting how he wants to speed up this fight via putting them down via bringing out the Iron Sand, which the Iron Sand shower was then just able to be perceived by Sakura and Chiyo, who used the mother puppet to just outspeed it, saving Sakura, with the only real time she got messed up was when the attack was just omnidirectional, yet she could still perceive the attack, she just had nowhere to go, with her actually reacting to the third Kasekage, blitzing and punching straight through it when it was flying towards her at full speed, and she just gets up from the ground and punches it before it could cover that last stretch of distance. Which, even once the puppet was down, Sasori then brought out the first piece of his strongest tool, being his own body, where he was easily pressuring Sakura with his flamethrower and then even stabs through her with his cord, with she still perceiving this cord, by the way. Yet Sakura was not only able to grab the cord and reel it, she was actually able to completely shatter his body apart. And while this doesn't seem that impressive as it can just rebuild itself, she literally cracks his stomach open, as you could see, which just forces him to bring out the 100 puppets that he once destroyed a country called the Land of This, according to the anime, which is virtually a non-combative town. So if it isn't stupidly clear that Sasori isn't a peak of the Akatsuki monster, that he does in fact have limits, I don't know what is. Sakura is able to react and perceive nearly all of his attacks, this being the same Sakura who's completely perception blitzed by Heavy Sasuke, with Conqueror and the War Arc just blatantly being stronger, noting how he's a black technique wielder when Sasori's only a red technique user. So I mean, while Sasori isn't crazy physically, his abilities are still pretty wild, and I think going against either Hidan or Konan, he would be quite the problem. And no, Sasori wasn't holding back the entire fight against Chiyo, and it's very, very clear when he actually changes his resolve, and it's when Chiyo decides to save Sakura instead of herself, and you can notice a total change in his demeanor, with his eyes dilating in shock, and then trying to stab Chiyo, yet he saw her move the strings and anticipated the attack, but decided not to dodge. So by all means, Sasori is strong and have some pretty impressive lore implications, but just isn't in the higher tiers of the Akatsuki, and is probably just a pretty bad matchup for the people higher in this tier. Moving higher into tier 3, we have Kakuzu, Hidan's partner and one of my favorite Akatsuki members. However, Kakuzu's scaling is pretty interesting, and he has been overrated for a long time, with many people not using his feats, for lore implications, but rather a lack of to actually do so, alluding to Kakuzu being some KCM1 level monster despite being beaten by Ina Shikacho. The argument branches from one of his more impressive showings where Kakuzu is able to fully put his hands up and react to a transformed Yugito, and this Yugito being fully transformed and hence faster than the Yugito who in V2 Cloak was able to actually tag KCM1 Naruto in the War Arc, and even swipe a blind Madara while in the air when he was clearly paralyzed. However, it is established that Yugito would be stronger in the War Arc despite being in Edo, and the reason is how all the Jinchuriki have Rinnegan and Sharingan projections that are stated to improve their Jinchuriki abilities, and Yugito's main ability is a Cat Claw, which he just uses here and on Kakuzu, just not with the claw portions, but does still use the motion for it. This is not only consistent with the Sharingan alone granting power through its kinetic vision, regardless of your use of its Genjutsu or other abilities or not, which for Obito's Jinchuriki, these aren't his paths, like paths of Obito, but are actually in fact his animal summons, which is noted by the data book. So they do all have the shared vision, obviously, which certainly increases speed by several fold, shown at Jiraiya vs Pain, where Jiraiya is able to resolve himself to kick the human path in the face, but once another path was looming, the same path was able to catch a Sage Mode punch from behind in smoke. So here they are clearly amped, and that being contentious is weird enough. However, even when giving the benefit of the doubt on this front, you still have to consider how when Kakuzu actually reacts to the paw, his hands are just straight up in one motion, when Yugito didn't even swipe like this via slicing, but rather blunt force, which she did through drawing her arm all the way back from under the knee to full extension behind her head and then back down, whereas Kakuzu never did this and just put him straight up. So if it isn't clear, this feat is pretty impressive due to Kakuzu literally tanking a Bijuu's attack, with the anime having him hold the paw up for a second despite not having the diamond armor active. It's just not that great of a speed feat, or at least as good as it's made out to be, and I mean, come on, Hidan reacts to her fireball. However, in this bout with Kakashi and Ko alongside Hidan, Kakuzu seemed to actually meet his match per se, with Kakashi actually starting the battle off with his Sharingan active, even though Kakashi notes he probably would have near-deathed Kakuzu with his MS, yet didn't. Kakuzu was still able to fight and keep up with Kakashi and vice versa, both being able to react and tank each other's attacks, such as Kakuzu blatantly surviving the Raikiri due to the nature of the hearts, and Kakashi tanking the Wind Styles attack with the cost of his vest, and him also parrying off Hidan at the same time. And this This doesn't sound that great for Kakuzu, but it actually could be interesting, as Hidan makes note that he's the first to ever survive this, and we know that there were 2 Bijuu caught prior to Shikaku due to the Eyes of the Gedo statue, indicating as much, with the anime having Hidan and Kakuzu take the Seven Tails Fu, which never gets contradicted, and simply leaves Han as the other, and the combo actually may have been used on Fu, which is pretty crazy. And speaking of the anime, when discussing this fight, many people like to bring up the anime and, you know, and say how Kakashi was actually bullying Kakuzu and did way better, but I also want to call attention to Kakuzu doing better as well, with the combos of his jutsu just being so crazy, such as him using the lightning heart to fly around and use the lightning as a laser beam chasing Shikamaru alongside the fire and wind heart autonomously flying and rapidly firing out fireballs and wind projectiles at the same time, which the manga doesn't ever contradict, with Kakuzu's hearts being able to actually fly in the war arc, which when reanimated, as you can see in the background of certain panels like this. But while these combos are really insane, they kind of show how he could have done better against Kakashi, and Kakashi was still able to react to his false darkness and cancel it out with 2 Raikiri, as well as react to the Searing Migraine. So I mean, the only time Kakuzu shows like great superiority would be his kick on Kakashi, which I think is pretty disingenuous to claim, considering a few different things. First being how the Raikiri is an attack that builds up speed linearly as you run, and Kakashi literally just gets up and takes 1 step, and Kakuzu intercepts him from off panel when his focus was on Hidan. So while this is kind of impressive, it placing him way above Kakashi is probably a bit awkward, but still, for his physical ability though, his limit is probably just like a heavy Sasuke, whom were stated at the time to be in the data book to actually have speed that takes away the breath of even the Akatsuki members, with it just alluding to him being stronger than them, which is probably talking about this tier of Akatsuki members, as we do know each member of Team 7 gets one. Naruto gets Kakuzu, Sakura gets Sasori, and Sasuke gets Deidara, with this Sasuke actually being able to perception blitz both Naruto and Sakura enough to when Naruto finally bests Kakuzu and blitzes him with the aid of some diversions, Naruto still thinks of Sasuke as in a separate league, which is supported by Orochimaru prior to Naruto's training when he was in the 3-tail state, and Orochimaru is pretty open about his opinions on their scaling in relation to each other. But Kakuzu physically is empirically stronger than Konan and Hidan, and potentially way stronger than Sasori if you considered a few different factors of your interpretation on how much you think Sasori held back against Sakura, as I mentioned earlier. And to be honest, I wouldn't be that mad if you did think Kakuzu is just way higher than Sasori or the other ones, as stylistically he does serve as a pretty bad matchup in general for Sasori, with him being able to harden his skin via Diamond Morph and base, which is the only time he ever does show blood, which means that the Diamond Morph just hardens out of it, and then he could just exit into his Jiangsu state, which virtually is just pretty crazy. I mean, even the data book says this form has no blind spots, and even then, just separating the hearts to have them fly around would cause a lot of problems for Sasori. And while I do think Sasori could hit them with, with something, since in the game Sasori combats Deidara via sniping him out of the air, the problem here is that the Kazekage acts very linearly and really focuses on one opponent, when the hearts are able to actually attack omnidirectionally, with Kakuzu's intellect being nothing to scoff at either, being called a tactician by even Shikamaru. So if it isn't clear, Kakuzu is rightfully in this spot and just above Sasori, Hidan, and all those guys. So he could even hold a substantial gap between the others, but I'm just going to keep him in this tier and be generous to Sasori and say he's here as well. And also, bro, we're this far in and you're not subscribed, you know you mess with the video. So if you are enjoying it, bro, subscribe or do yourself a big favor and watch my other Akatsuki related videos to hear much more. And yeah, on to Deidara. Now, for who I believe is the strongest in tier 3, being Deidara, we actually have a lot of lore implications to go over for this placement, and I suppose firstly this should be done by his placing above Sasori. And why do I say this? Well, to be honest, we know the arguments. We know Deidara notes to Kakashi that Sasori is probably stronger than himself. Then the rebuttal to that is always how he was just trying to get Kakashi off his back. So where do I stand? And if you watch my last 2 versus videos of the Akatsuki, you'll know that I used to be on Sasori's side, and I used to actually counter this by saying that in order to hold a basis that Deidara wants Kakashi off his back, you have to presuppose that Deidara cares about his own self-well-being or interest and safety, which kind of gets contradicted by him taunting and riling up Naruto, which just means that he wouldn't have a reason for wanting Kakashi off his back. Now, of course, I do disagree with this now, and for a few reasons. First being how Deidara is established to fight Bijou in character, and both in the case of the Three Tails and Gaara, we'll come back to Gaara as Deidara low-key beats the brakes off Gaara, but in the case of the Three Tails, he uses a C2 to one-shot it in its full form due to its docile nature, and this is a C2 since C2 is always manifested into an animal of some sort rather than odd-shaped figures like the C3 Ohaku. So Deidara here is just trying to, he's engaging in his prideful nature of his art, which just captured Gaara, and is taunting about that via also pissing Naruto off for him to increase his chakra cloak, seeing as for a C2 to not absolutely bomb Naruto out of this world, he needs to transform into a higher state, or else Deidara would just have to hold back incredibly, causing him more trouble. So him riling up Naruto isn't a defeater to him not caring about his own self-interest. And let me ask you this. Sakura and Shio probably don't seem that opposing compared to Kakashi of the Sharingan and the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, so Deidara has a very good reason for doing this and is probably just lying, which is much more consistent with you aligning with things like, you know, how Deidara is able to do battle with Heavy Sasuke, who again perception blitzes Sakura, who is keeping up with Deidara. And while Deidara doesn't scale to Sasuke in combat speed, we can use other comparative measures to say that he could have done much better against Sasuke if he wasn't so hot-headed, such as how he never really tried to use a face-attaching bird and never uses his scope goggle and never even tried to engage him in flight speed, which is shown to be faster than his bird's explosive velocities as shown in the war against Akatsuchi, who could actually react to the explosive velocities easier than he could perceive Deidara and Oniki in flight speed. So by all means, when you account for how the explosive velocities were messing up Sasuke, Deidara certainly could have done much better, and this isn't saying that he could beat Sasuke easily or anything, as the bombs do have different radius ranges, so he could have reacted, just wasn't fast enough to fully evade them. So they could still be slightly faster or close to a CM2 Sasuke, meaning that Deidara could have given him a much better fight if he didn't use his pride so much in his battle with Sasuke. Now with that, for those who want to see what a Deidara is like more in character, then check out the Gaara fight. Well, you'll notice while Gaara had to defend the Sand Village and couldn't go all out, Deidara also couldn't go all out and couldn't kill Gaara, and also had to capture him alive. And as we also know, he didn't even have enough clay and was just underestimating Gaara, yet still beat him up and bombed the Sand Village, with their first encounter being that Gaara is actually trying to off-guard Deidara instantly, and he just instantly reacts, fully flown off by the next page, and where you can see that the sand coming in from a full speed, nearly point blank, from a disadvantageous position, Deidara was able to fire a bird out of his left hand, as that's the main hand he uses for clay making, place chakra in it to expand and gain the life force in it, and then hop on it and then fly away, all while the gourd sand was point blank. Then Deidara in his flight speed totally just weaves around, forcing Gaara to rip one of the largest displays of sand ever out of the ground, only for Deidara to get excited and then completely weave all of Shukaku's manifested hands to then use his fast birds that completely weave in and out of all of Shukaku's fingers, forcing Gaara to enter his sand shell defense, which Gaara used to distract Deidara, then enveloping him in a massive ball that catches Deidara's arm, which is then revealed to be a plot by Deidara to insert the bombs into the sand, which he forces Gaara back into the eggshell, and these will be with him when he does so. And then the anime actually has Deidara just actually escaping the sand prison and just weaving the sand around for quite a while without any bird, just like flying through the air, flopping around by himself, with him then popping a bird out and then flying around, and then he gets caught and then does the plan, making Deidara just stupidly impressive. And from this point on, Deidara is almost out of chakra and bombs. He can't kill Gaara, and he just lost his main arm that he uses to make all of his bombs, to which he then still has, you know, pieces of, you know, there's still like him outsmarting Gaara with his two diversions, one being a C3 hailed as the pinnacle of all explosions, which is still pretty impressive considering he can practically tie any member of the Akatsuki under him with C0 if anything were to ever come to that. But his C4 is also just pretty insane, with it just being able to wipe all of them out, being comparable to even Oniki's particle style, which here is in compares to a TSO. So I mean, the C4 is just really crazy, and also acting as a dud to shock the opponent and kind of stall them. So by all means, Deidara has what it takes to beat all the opponents below him and all the members below him, and just scales much higher by virtue of fighting Sasuke, the strongest of all their opponents, and having the most busted arsenal of all of them, and doesn't really scale higher due to people like Kisame and Orochimaru being just on a different tier. Now, after Deidara and his tier, we move on to tier 2, and we have Kisame. And before discussing Kisame, I want to preface that while he is the only member in tier 2, Orochimaru would also be here if you were to include him on this list, but we aren't including him just considering the length of the video, and I've already discussed Kisame versus Orochimaru a lot and pretty extensively in Kisame versus the Akatsuki, so if you want to hear him match up against, you know, Orochimaru or even Deidara, I guess, then that's probably a better place for it. And again, all these will be in a playlist for you guys to binge and have the best understanding of the Akatsuki and their powers compared to one another. So yeah, Kisame is very comparable to Orochimaru, and that fight is just, it's pretty good, so by all means check that out. But Orochimaru isn't even a member by this point in the series, so it's kind of weird just to talk about him for an extra 10 minutes or so when I still want to lay out the tier 1 and Kisame's more thoroughly. So for Kisame, I actually used to think that he isn't that strong, and Samehada did all the work for him, and mainly just analyzing his fight with B. And while Samehada definitely made things possible that wouldn't otherwise be, such as, you know, Samehada totally outreacting B when B charges at him in his V1, ducking under the blade, and then completely goes back up to knock B off his feet and then take his chakra, which he can take 6 tails at a time. But this also isn't to say that, like, Kisame, he's also just reacting. Like, he's able to put his foot up during B's version 2 charge, which is pretty impressive when you also consider how, like, he does just get overpowered here, but Kisame was still able to react with the aid of the extra chakra he took from B. So in base and with Samehada, Kisame just usually wouldn't be able to fight like this. It's just that B was a very peculiar match for Kisame that helped him out a lot, and when you consider things like his fight with 7th Gate Guy, you then come to many conclusions as to why Kisame probably is just a higher tier than tier 3 and is still really impressive regardless of your opinions on this fight. And the reason this is so impressive is due to how Kisame just isn't even at full power in this fight and is actually implied to be heavily drained by Samehada, to where he's just extremely frail, with him being able to take some of Samehada's chakra and maybe B's chakra as well before being interrupted. So then we have no clue if he took enough for his full reserves, and I doubt it, to be honest. You know, he literally has Bijou levels, and considering he was also interrupted by Guy when taking Aoba's chakra, we just don't know if Kisame's at full power here, and it's just probably likely not the case, with him also just not having Samehada, which was what makes the 7 Ninja Swordsman powerful in the first place. And still in this state, he is able to react to base Guy's kick casually, and while it seems that he actually saw Guy coming from a distance, this isn't that relevant, as you can actually see where Kisame's guard is at when Guy's toes are in the corner of the panel ready to kick, yet he still reacts to Guy, who's dedicated to training more than Kakashi. As the 3rd data book states, he's the most dedicated shinobi ever, and Kakashi is stated to hone his skills every single day in the 10-year anniversary guide, which just hints at how strong this guy is in comparison to Kakashi at this time. And the 6th gate is comparable to the Sharingan plus Raikiri charge in the War Arc plus the 6th gate, where he's able to actually be outdone by Kisame reacting on par, with Kisame overpowering base Guy with his 1000 Hungry Shark, which is stronger than a 6th gate Asaku Jaku by a degree, to where Guy felt the need to go into the 7th gate, a form with attacks not even comparable to the 6th gate, just alluding to how Kisame stacks up to Kakashi at this time. And this same Kisame is able to react equally with a 7th gate Guy, despite Guy not being in water due to the 7th gate aura when Kisame is. So by all means, Kisame is a monster of ability. So when you consider how crazy this is in base, plus potentially him being weakened, and then you give him his fusion with Samehada, it gets pretty bad. And the fusion is stated by the chapter synopsis statements have no weaknesses, which is probably just true. I mean, this form is ridiculous, having Kisame going from only being able to move his foot during a whole charge to then just chasing and outspeeding B. So bad that, like, Yuki was, like, scared for B's life, and I mean, I don't blame him. Even Kisame's blades that come out of his fins are stronger, or strong enough, I guess, to pierce both the V2 and V1 cloaks respectively, and going all the way to base and then just draining his chakra. And Kisame can also just sense through his skin as well as breathe underwater inside this giant bubble that follows him everywhere. So yeah, picture that amp on top of 7th gate Guy, and it's pretty crazy. And the one thing about Kisame's arsenal that's just never brought up is how crazy his jutsu are considering his reserves. And what I mean, well, is his 3 main jutsu, being the Water Shockwave, Hungry Sharks, and the Shark Bomb, are all just stupidly versatile and have so much potential. And also, side note, he has 4 out of 5 chakra natures, he just doesn't use them. But anyway, The shockwave is a jutsu that he uses very casually to create waves of water to offset the opponent's balance, which then he can choose to actually increase the volume of this water, and he can actually just turn that into the giant, the bubble that he uses against B. So yeah, these actually are the same jutsu, weirdly enough. And then the hungry shark jutsu is not only just way more versatile in the manner that can go from 5 to 1000, but also in how it works. And in the 10-year anniversary guide and in the data book, it's made clear that Kisame fires out chakra bullets, which attract the sharks, and then they just swim to those bullets. So the only reason it made a tsunami against Guy is because Guy didn't move. So imagine if Kisame were to put these on like Data, right, and they were just flying around creating a ton of water as well. It's pretty insane, and we don't really know how he places these bullets, but it's probably during these signs here, prior to him summoning these sharks in the anime. Kisame actually does do something that could allude to when he does this that's actually incredibly detailed. And prior to the summoning of these sharks, he throws up a right hand tiger, potentially indicating when they fire off. And just a note, the anime also just demonstrates the diversity of the shark bomb very clearly, with them just not being as detailed as in the manga, where you can see when you think about the shark bomb, you're probably just thinking about like the giant one that he uses against Guy, but you probably forgot he also has a miniature one with one arm that overpowered base Guy that he's actually able to then get inside like an avatar and swim away. And the anime makes this very clear, but in the manga you can still see the shark's eyes in the upper right hand corner of the bottom right hand panel. So pretty crazy stuff. And considering this is a fatigued Kisame and not at full power without Samehada, imagine what he could do at his peak with him having the most amount of chakra in the entire Akatsuki. So by all means, Kisame is crazy, but if you do want to know more about him, then I really do encourage you to watch Kisame versus the Akatsuki. But anyway, moving on to tier 1, we have the third strongest Akatsuki member. We have Pain. And yeah, I know, Pain below Itachi isn't a popular take when it probably should be, but I think Pain versus Itachi is probably one of the best, if not the best, debates in Naruto. And I have my own video on that topic that's literally 40 minutes long, so I assume you could imagine why I wouldn't be able to properly cover that and explain it here with just the same information. But I'll go over some brief scaling for Pain and Itachi and then Obito to demonstrate why they are so strong and how they're above the other members. And if you want to know more about Itachi versus Pain, that will be linked in the description, along with Itachi versus the Akatsuki that goes very into like Itachi versus Obito as well. So please, for your sake, check those out so it doesn't seem like I'm just baselessly assuming these positions or anything like that. So I don't have to rerun the exact same video later, as your boy does try to keep these videos fresh with new information, not just the same regurgitated word for word video. But still, Pain is a complete monster who is not only the leader of the Akatsuki, but revered by all of them due to his power and charisma. And while this doesn't include Obito due to him being the true manipulator, and Itachi due to him acting as a spy in the organization, this does still just put Pain in a lower tier that is virtually untouched by the other members, which is consistent with the third data book noting how Pain is the invincible, or he's he's just a god, with Obito even mocking Pain in his titles due to how much Jiraiya pressed him. And while I've heard that many people argue this is like an anti-feat for Pain, this probably just isn't the case, considering things like Jiraiya in Sage Mode implies he's simply beyond the Sannin tier and is confident in facing a character whom he knows beat Hanzo, who fought all 3 Sannin on a superior footing. And while Jiraiya is able to react and combat Pain, it's more of the paths that one-on-one are close to Jiraiya, with Jiraiya just like holding an edge with the chapter synopsis stating that now that it's one-on-one, Jiraiya is on the road to victory. But once it becomes like a 3-on-1, then it's shown that Jiraiya would just have a very hard time ever facing the 3, with how their abilities don't allow for him to use ninjutsu, or they don't allow for him to be able to catch Pain off guard, which is just a testament to how casual Pain was at certain points in this fight, with him not even dilating his pupils for the Rinnegan Sensory. And while the Toad Sage was able to survive all 6 paths jumping him at once, enough to drag one under in even a lesser version of his Sage Mode without an arm, it's still a testament that Pain is superior, which isn't really contested, with Pain being able to actually keep up with Sage Naruto when he's at his peak. And Sage Naruto is literally just a stronger Jiraiya, with him also just having a pretty good narrative rival for the end of 5 Kage Summit Sasuke. So yes, Sage Naruto is physically greater than Pain, such as in like durability. Pain was like Pain was just pretty fatigued in this fight, and you cannot overstate that. And he also just couldn't kill Naruto, so he had a similar restriction to many of the other members that they have in their fights, but it's just not brought up as much. He couldn't kill kill Naruto, which is made evident by how most of the paths got one-shot by Sage Naruto, yet he was able to enter his Tendo state and engage Six Tails Naruto, who was stronger, being able to outpace that Naruto running away from him using Chibaku Tensei. And yes, the anime does have Pain going crazy against Six Tails, so if you want some higher stuff for Pain, then there you go. But saying he's just above all the Akatsuki and close to Obito and Itachi alongside his, his and Itachi's narrative benchmarks being 5 Kage Summit Sasuke and Sage Naruto, it's pretty clear that Pain is just a beast. And there are a lot more talking points for Pain, but we're already pushing, 35 minutes. So again, check out Itachi vs. Pain. Then, in second place, we have Itachi, and Itachi is pretty crazy as a fighter, and when you analyze what his illness is, you'll realize that he probably, you probably just can count out whatever you assert happened in Hebi Sasuke versus Itachi, which was atrocious. I mean, Itachi bullied him at every turn, perception blitzing him, you name it, but we know that whenever he was revived in the war, he would have still been revived at a point in which he was alive, which would just been some point prior to that fight, such as in the beginning of Shippuden, where he was spamming jutsu and fighting Kakashi despite having only 30% of his chakra. And this is pretty consistent when you consider what his illness probably was. And I think New Horizons has a very solid video discussing this, with the two conclusions being MPA, or microscopic polyangiitis, or HIV, and which both explain why he got so much worse in his fight with Sasuke, and why Itachi just isn't some arbitrary outlier to the Edo Tensei, when that just in fact couldn't be the case. The Edo Tensei copied the amount of dead pigment hair cells that Hiruzen had, giving him his hair color, along with the amount of wrinkles he had during being the exact same during the Orochimaru fight, rather than the Uchiha massacre or the Nine Tails attack. The Uchiha all have unique ocular nerves tied to their eyes, with Hashirama also just having these same exact cells, so it's pretty clear what the Edo Tensei does. So yeah, Itachi can scale to his Edo Tensei feats, which are pretty crazy, scaling him just blatantly above Pain, which is consistent considering how Sasuke is stating to not only surpass Itachi in EMS, which just kind of puts Itachi blatantly above peak Kage Summit Sasuke, whose equals are relative to Sage Naruto, who could fight Pain on solid footing. So by all means, there are just a lot of avenues for Itachi to beat Pain, and while I do think the fight is close, I think categories Itachi gets are just slightly more crucial than the ones that Pain gets. So by all means, this is just like a Spark Notes version of it. So if you really want to understand it, please check out Itachi vs. Pain, because I'm not just going to copy and paste all of that, as that seems kind of like cheating. Then, with that being said, we have Obito, and to absolutely nobody's surprise, Obito is always mocking and talking down to Pain, and his rivalry with Itachi was just that, a rivalry, with him likely still being superior. And I mean, I don't think anyone would ever contest Obito being number one. I mean, there are arguments against it, but let's be honest, Kamui is just too busted, and this Obito is close enough, or close to the same one who's able to keep up with Minato on a low end, who watched the entire Pain fight, included that nah, Pain wasn't a big deal, yet Obito was, and then this same Minato is compared to like KCM2 Naruto in the war. So by all means, I think it's pretty fair to put him at number one. In the same vein, Itachi versus the Akatsuki hammers on this as well, which will also just be linked in the description. So yeah, if it isn't clear, this video was meant to be the ultimate Akatsuki ranking, having alternate videos available for most of the matches, given a layer of more explanation if you need it, such as Itachi versus every Akatsuki member, Kisame versus every Akatsuki member, Itachi versus Pain, Sasori versus Deidara, Orochimaru versus Kisame, and several more. So here is the list, and you could use all those to fill it in to create the ultimate Akatsuki ranking by myself. So yeah, the purpose was to just fill in those gaps for those who are curious on how I would truly rank them. So by all means, if you want to have the best knowledge, go and watch that playlist. But yeah, if you did enjoy, please consider liking and subscribing, as it would help me out a ton. And as always, love you guys.